Issachar, Elijah, and Elisha shared legacies, unveiling the miraculous connections. The way Christians fabricated their own history by altering Jewish history. In the Jewish prospect, the book of Revelation resembles the book of Daniel and the book of Ezekiel. A Jewish perspective, the story of Issachar is similar to that of Elijah and Elisha. The Bible may provide relevant references to these statements, which I can provide. I shall be narrating for Gino 𝙭.
In regard to the claim that Christians fabricated their own history by changing Jewish history, it is important to note that the Bible, both the Old and New Testaments, contains a complex collection of literary genres and historical accounts written by various authors over the course of several centuries. These texts have been extensively studied by scholars, who have identified several similarities and influences between them. Accordingly, the book of Revelation, which was written by John, draws inspiration from earlier biblical books, including Ezekiel and Daniel. Likewise, the story of Issachar from a Christian's point of view is deeply rooted in the Hebrew Scriptures, and many aspects of his life and teachings can be seen as fulfillments of Jewish prophecy and tradition, but not from a Jewish perspective, where it is about the Israelites, Exodus 4 verses 22 to 23. There is also a similarity between Issachar and Elijah and Elisha, who were prophets in the Old Testament. Miracles were performed by all three. They were persecuted for their teachings, and their influence impacted future religious traditions. To help you better understand the topic, here are some biblical references. There are certainly similarities and influences between the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel and the book of Ezekiel, as claimed in the book of Revelation. In all three books, for example, there is imagery of beasts and symbolic numbers, such as 7 and 12. A vision in Daniel 7 verses 1 to 8 depicts 4 beasts rising out of the sea, each representing a kingdom that dominates the world. According to Revelation 13 verses 1 to 10, a beast with 10 horns and 7 heads comes out of the sea with 10 heads and is also interpreted as a symbol of political power. In the book of Ezekiel, a vision of a chariot with wheels and 4 living creatures is interpreted as a symbol of God's power and glory, Ezekiel 1 verses 1 to 28. There is a vision in the book of Revelation of a throne in heaven surrounded by 4 creatures, a symbol of God's authority and majesty, Revelation 4 verses 1 to 11. There are certainly similarities between the stories of Issachar, Elijah and Elisha, as the claim goes. As an example, all three are associated with miracles and are persecuted for their beliefs.
The prophet Elijah is portrayed as challenging the worship of the pagan god Baal and being carried to heaven by a chariot of fire, 1 Kings chapters 18 and 19, 2 Kings chapter 2 verses 1 to 18. On the other hand, Issachar is seen as the Messiah who will fulfill the prophecies of the Hebrew Scriptures and bring salvation to all people through his death and resurrection, Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 to 17, John chapter 3 verse 16. Despite my search, I did not find anything in the Old Testament that mentions the Messiah dying for our sins. Bible texts and figures have a great deal in common and are certainly influenced by one another. I shall be listing some other biblical references which might be relevant to this discussion. 1. In Revelation chapter 1 verses 1 to 3, John, who received a vision from God, is introduced as the author of the book. There is also a sense of urgency and imminence in the passage regarding things that must soon take place. 2. Daniel chapter 2 verses 1 to 49. This chapter describes King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a statue made of different materials, which Daniel interprets as representing the succession of kingdoms that will ultimately be destroyed by God's kingdom. 3. In Ezekiel chapter 1 verses 1 to 28, Ezekiel describes a vision of a chariot with wheels and 4 living creatures, which he interprets as a symbol of God's glory and power. 4. 1 Kings chapters 18 and 19. These chapters describe the confrontation between the prophet Elijah and the prophets of Baal, in which Elijah calls down fire from heaven to consume his sacrifice. 5. In Matthew chapter 1 verses 1 to 17, Issachar's lineage is traced back to Abraham, emphasizing his Jewish heritage. A number of biblical references can be relevant to the topic, as shown in these examples. The following are some more biblical references you may find interesting. 6. The Jewish view is that Isaiah chapter 53 refers to the Jewish people as the suffering servant, but Christians sometimes interpret it as a prophecy regarding Yeshua's suffering and death on the cross. 7. It is also often seen as a prophecy of Yeshua's crucifixion, with its opening lines, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Quoted by him on the cross in Matthew chapter 27 verse 46 and Mark chapter 15 verse 34. A Jew would say that when Esther entered the house of idols, the divine presence left her. Entering the king's inner court uninvited is a capital offense unless the king extends his golden scepter. As she pauses, she chants the lament of Psalm chapter 22 in response to the loss of the divine spirit. The Midrash continues with Esther attempting to understand why the spirit left her. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Quoted by her. This is just a small selection of the many biblical references that could be relevant to the discussion. In the scriptures, Elijah, Elisha, and Yeshua did the same thing. Christians with some tweaks change Elijah, Elisha, and Yeshua's behavior to reflect what we see in the scriptures where Elijah, Elisha and Yeshua did the same thing. In the Old Testament and New Testament, they are credited with similar miracles. As examples, here are a few. 8. People were miraculously fed both by Elijah and by Yeshua. Elijah tells a widow who is running out of flour and oil in 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 8 to 16 that God will provide for them. Miracle of miracles, the flour and oil do not run out until after the drought is over. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish are all that Yeshua needs to feed a large crowd in Matthew chapter 14 verses 13 to 21 of the New Testament. In 2 Kings chapter 4 verses 42 to 44 Elisha does the same. 9. Yeshua and Elijah are both associated with healing. Elijah raises a widow's son from the dead by praying to God and lying on him in 1 Kings chapter 17 verses 17 to 24. In Luke chapter 7 verses 11 to 17, Yeshua does the same thing. People with blindness, deafness, and leprosy have been healed by Yeshua. A healing of Naaman's leprosy is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 5 verses 1 to 19. 10. Elijah and Yeshua are both depicted as being able to control the elements. Elijah prays for rain for the drought to end in 1 Kings chapter 18 verses 41 to 46, and rain begins. Yeshua calms a storm with a word, as recorded in Mark chapter 4 verses 35 to 41. In that they are presented in very different contexts and have very different purposes. The miracles attributed to Elijah, Elisha, and Yeshua have some similarities. Otherwise, most of what was written in the New Testament has actually been copied from the Old Testament, so they can justify the New Testament and hope that you do not notice, and if you do, they find a way to explain it. Yeshua, Elijah, and Elisha share remarkable legacies, which reveal their remarkable connections. Our Bible is filled with references and narratives that highlight the similarities between their teachings, miracles, and persecutions. In spite of the fact that Christians have interpreted these stories through their own lens, it is important to acknowledge that they are composed of diverse genres and historical accounts. It is through examining these interconnected narratives that we gain a deeper understanding of the profound influences that shaped both Jewish and Christian traditions. Please continue to follow this page for more content like this if you enjoyed this discussion. As we explore the fascinating connections within the scriptures, please share your thoughts and insights in the comments below. Let us know if you enjoyed this video by giving it a thumbs up. I would like to thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey.